Welcome to the Family Office Sherpa podcast. I'm your host, Shaun Parkin, founder and managing director of Whole Road Investments. The aim of this podcast is to provide practical and implementable advice for those looking to build, manage, or service a family office. This is not, however, investment advice, so please check the disclaimer in the show notes. In this episode, I'll be going through 13 less obvious speed bumps when building your reporting infrastructure.
This is the Family Office Sherpa.
So today, I thought I'd provide some of the, let's call them less obvious issues that can arise when selecting, onboarding, and to be honest, using your reporting software. So when Whole Road started, the first 2 or 3 years really was just projects around selecting and helping to onboard reporting software, really, or the infrastructure around that as well, but really primarily focused on this number one issue that I see with a lot of family office and continue to do so, which is how do we aggregate all our reporting in a non-custodial way, and how do we get the analytics and the information out of it for managing the portfolio. So I thought this was a good idea. These are all from personal experience over that period, and hopefully highlighting them in this episode can give a little bit of food for thought and hopefully mitigate some of them for you. Or at least think about it at the beginning rather than the end. So let's go through them. So number one, custody. So when I started the business, a lot of people, it actually came from family offices that they didn't have custodial reporting, like full custody, like an institutional client might have. And so what that meant was we didn't have this central source of truth. We had sometimes a long list of, fund managers that had their own custodial arrangements, wealth managers, even though they might be running sort of separately managed accounts or something like that. It was all held on their custody. It wasn't our custody. So when we set up the reporting infrastructure, it sounds like you should have this central custodian, which we don't. So we've got to have this aggregation point that is specific to us. So the thing that we run into here is, we've got this reporting infrastructure. They have a direct data feed to this custodian. Our wealth manager or asset manager uses that custodian, therefore it should just come straight in. No, because it's not your custodial feed, it's their custodial account. So we ran into that a couple of times when we thought that because we held, a separately managed account, in the case of bond SMA with a private bank, that we could get it directly over from their custodian, but we couldn't. So we ended up having to get it from the private bank into the platform. But that's just something to think about. Number one, who owns the custodial arrangement, or who owns the custodial account number, really? So that's number one. The other thing that sort of pops up is data feeds aren't perfect. So if the platform says, we have a custodial feed with this particular counterparty, great, but you still need, it still isn't a set and forget thing. Like custodial feeds or data feeds are not perfect. You do need to make sure that there's an ability to at least do a rec and check, or reconciliation and check, to make sure that it is coming down the pipe accurately. And so what we tend to do is use points of note. So it might be some version of reconciling the IRR or the time-weighted return, money on investor cap, some version of it, so that we know, okay, well, all these sometimes a high number of moving parts actually do reconcile. So that's, I guess, and that did happen a couple of times where with when we reconciled the data, there was some different ways that the manager had reconciled maybe a corporate action or something like that, and that didn't feed through the same way that we would, right? So just being aware that data feeds aren't perfect. Number three, the pricing. Pricing can be, for what you'd expect to be sort of a software, there can be some component pieces that are ambiguous, maybe, let's call it that. So sometimes the software provider uses an asset size fee, which, is not truly accurate, because what they're trying to do is bake in the complexity or bake in the risk. But as an example, I had one client that had what looked like a large asset size, and it was assets, but it was really held in 2 single stocks, and the rest of the portfolio was relatively straightforward. But because the size of the assets looked large, and they thought, well, large equals complex, and we'll price it appropriately, it was kind of a misrepresentation. So I'd say when you're having these pricing conversations in particular, make sure you're clear around sort of what, how are they doing it? What are they basing it on? Because, that can mean, quite significant price differences. Number 4, nothing stays static. Switching costs can be really a lot higher than expected. When I say switching costs, I mean switching from old to new, in terms of, we've chosen this for this period of time, but we probably expect this may not be appropriate when we get more complex, or we might change, all sorts of different things. So when you do select and you start to onboard it, this is why we always start to say, get time series data as soon as possible. Understand how much backfill is going to be represented, or how much, old data is going to be put into this new, because that can really affect costs of time, and rarely of increasing costs of the actual infrastructure. It's just the level of time that it takes to do that. So make sure that you just sort of understand that nothing is just going to be a set and forget. It's not going to be, we're going to make this decision once and then we're never going to have to think about it again. But nothing stays static. And that means that sometimes you move platforms, but making sure that that movement of platform can be done relatively straightforward. And that's a lot of the time making sure that you own the data, to be perfectly honest with you. Number 5, vendor locking can come in different guises, right? When I say vendor locking, means that you don't have control over the infrastructure. You might be using an intermediary, or you might be using a firm that specializes in it. You are locked into that relationship with the vendor to get access to the underlying infrastructure or the underlying reporting. So, and that's a very obvious version of it. Other versions of vendor locking or being locked in is things like, if you have a key person internally that understands this, you are, if they leave, you're going to be challenged by it. But, if you are using a platform that requires what you probably call a power user or some version of it, then there's key person risk. So vendor, either internally or externally, is really important to make sure that you're not locked into it. We see a lot of that with advice firms, to be perfectly honest with you. So we might use the advice firm's infrastructure because it's good and it gets us the reporting we're looking for. But if we moved away from them, we lose that. So you're locked into them. So there's just something to be cognizant of. And a big reason, to be honest, why offices that I work with have their own reporting as well as the reporting from their counterparties. Number 6. The general ledger and the investment book of record, so the accounting book of record and the investment book of record, often are very separate. You do get firm platforms that have that duality. So they have what you call the general ledger software and the investment record software together. Often, though, what we have is a general ledger software in Australia. It might be Xero. In the US, it might be Sage or something like that, but they come different. So a lot of the time, the software will say, we report here on the investment side, and that's where we stop. So if you're expecting the platform to be tax aligned in terms of reporting, or the general ledger and cash flow and things like that, then you need to be aware that where it stops and other components start. So that's just the other thing you got to really think about. Number 7, total costs versus just the software costs. Some of the software platforms can run into quite high fee, but if that fee also includes a significant amount of assistance or managed services or some version of that, then you should look at that in total, as opposed to something might just be this is what you're getting from us and that's it. We're not giving you any client service and all the rest of it. So, you've got to really map out who's going to be managing this platform, who's going to be responsible for it, and get a total cost. Because, some specialist firms, it might look like it's expensive because of the total cost of the cost. But if you looked at it from how much you might internally have to allocate from a staff and timing and all these sorts of things, then it actually looks really reasonable and it looks like a much more efficient and effective way of doing it. So again, map out the total cost here. I think that's a really good one. So that was number 7. Number 8, the pipeline of improvements of the platform can be really regionally and client type specific. So as an example, which I find, which is, okay, they're developing benchmarks, or they're putting data sets that are going to automate and be really, really helpful, but they're not the ones that we use in this particular region. CPI data, major benchmark data for cash and bonds and things like that. Bank feeds, data feeds and things that we've got 300 data feeds, but none of them work in the region that I am in. So just being really, when they say we've got all these data feeds or we've got all this automation, really dig into it and make sure that it's for you as well, right? And also just manage expectations when they say, I'm sure we'll get to that, or I'm sure that that's in our pipeline. Just be really like, well, it's not guaranteed and I'm not going to wait for it, but potentially I will eat that lack of data feeds or the lack of automation because other components within the software are exactly what I'm looking for. So just be mindful of, before you sign and before you start doing all the heavy lifting in terms of onboarding and all the rest of it, that you don't get to the end and go, we thought this would be ready by now, or we thought this data feed would be available by now. So just be really, manage expectations on those. Number 9. I'm starting to say this a little bit now. Things like derivatives. So you might have swaps, like currency forwards and things like that. Or you might have some version of option strategies, whatever that looks like. If that's a big part of your portfolio management, like that's the way that you directly invest, then that's a question you need to ask the platform or the reporting software now, because not many of them manage the derivative P&L and things like that effectively. So if that's a big part of your portfolio management style, or that's an instrument that you use in terms of derivatives, then ask that question at the beginning. What's that going to look like? Talk to other users and see if what it looks like, because there are some workarounds and there's some component pieces, but just be aware that it's not necessarily native to the platform. Number 10. Not everything's going to reconcile when you backfill perfectly. If anyone has ever done a systems upgrade or something, or a platform change or anything like that, you've got to make a decision on where to draw the line on things like, how much backfill am I going to do? And where's the diminishing returns of extended backfill? Like, I'm going to take 5 years or 10 years or 1 year or whatever it ends up being. And then I'm going to draw a line in the sand, usually some version of a fiscal year, and then say, this is where we're starting from. And everything behind that, we're not going to upload, or we're not going to, use. Or, if you really, really want to have all that in there, just be aware that, in my experience anyway, a lot of data is held in Excel. If you've got long-term data sets here, they're often going to be adjustments to those. There's going to be different people doing different calculations, sometimes just small differences. So it's not necessarily going to be exactly perfect. And as an office, you're going to have to make a decision to say, this is where we're going to start from. We've reconciled it. We're comfortable with where we're at. It doesn't match perfectly, but we're comfortable with it. And I think this is a big part of sometimes when it becomes very frustrating, is like, well, are we just keep we cannot figure out why this isn't matching. So, and to be honest, what I end up doing a lot of the time, if it's a long backfill piece and we don't have the time or the internal skill set to do it, then we might use a firm to do that reconciliation for us and to farm that out, because that is a significant amount of effort and potential frustration for someone in your office. Which is why, to be honest, like I said, I always, when people say, what should I do first? Is it get some data, get some time series data now. Even if it's just really simple cloud-based platforms that are not really there for portfolio management, they're not going to give you the output or anything. But if they start to do the time series that you can look back on in 2 or 3 years and say, well, it's all there, it's easily exportable, it's easily transferable to a new platform, that is sometimes some of the best thing, to have that in place. Right. Number 11, I think I'm up to. Just because it worked in one office doesn't mean it's going to work for yours. And that's because, you have different underlying constituents. If you're a family office that has a significant amount of public markets and not much in the way of, the more idiosyncratic in terms of data aggregation, then certain platforms are going to work beautifully for you because, in public markets in particular, you can grab data sets from the exchange very, very easily, very low cost, and all the rest of it. But if you're looking at data sets that might be in separate portals, they might be really hard to get hold of, the platform may work with one and not the other. So when you do talk to other families or you do talk to the salespeople and things like that, just be really clear around your list of priorities, because they don't always match up. But this is why you should talk to other offices, because like I said, I've been doing this for nearly 7 years and it's still not this silver bullet, this is going to work for everybody. So I think just getting that idea in your head that, no, we will take this, but we have to ask really pointed questions around their experience with the assets that look like ours is really important. So that's number 11. 3 more. Number 12. So the messy middle of onboarding. So this is something I can't emphasize enough, which is you've made the decision. You've started the data and it's going well, platform's good or the intermediary is really good. We're starting to get there. And yet, and right in the middle, there's this element of this doesn't, and you're showing it to people because, you got to show your progress and people want to see what's happening, because it's not always, sometimes it's quite an expensive, relatively, higher fee than Excel or whatever the previous one was. So you want to make sure that everyone's coming on the journey with you, as it were, right? And they look at it and they go, well, this isn't nearly as awesome as the demo looked like when the salesperson showed us. So why is that? And this is what I like to term the messy middle, because you're halfway in and halfway out. So you're starting to get the data and you're starting to design the instance and you're starting to get those outputs and it's starting to look cool, but it's not quite as good as we saw with the demo. And it's a moving thing. Like, you continually having to get this reporting in place. So the messy middle of onboarding is when you need to, if you're in charge of this or you're the person that's managing the onboarding of this is where you need to manage expectations. That's my biggest tip here. Especially those that sort of go, oh, well, I'm just going to use the old version, or I'm just going to go back to the way it was because that just looks like, that doesn't look heaps better or something like that. Manage expectations, but get people to understand where you are in the process. Because if they think this is the end result, before all the cool stuff happens at the end, which is the design, where you can create great charts, when you can create great dashboards and stuff like that, that's the cool bit at the end. That's when everyone goes, oh, that looks heaps better. But this messy middle bit where it kind of looks clunky and it doesn't look exactly what we looked for in the demo, this is where you need to manage expectations, and this is where you need to manage, just making sure that everyone is aligned. Number 13. So middleware will be needed a lot of the time. So when I say middleware, like I said, when the GL and the investment book of record are not within the same ecosystem, you'll quite often will need some version of middleware there. But what the middleware I'm talking about here is a lot of the time is things like private market automation software, which might not be, again, native to the reporting software that you've got. But just so I guess the reason why I put this on as a speed bump is just because you've got to be aware of what sits within the platform. So within that ecosystem, they might own a pacing software, or they might own something that looks like cash flow management software. And they might be add-ons, but they're still within that ecosystem. Or they maybe say, well, we've got quite open architecture. So if you choose a software that is, say, private markets, automation and passing tools and things like that, you can plug it straight into there. So you just think of all the component pieces that can plug into the platform and how open architecture they are. How do they speak to other platforms? How can they bring data in? Because sometimes you'll need some version of middleware, or you'll need to add software that has a specific process that it's looking to do, and it needs to be able to plug in to your software that you're selected. So that's it. And the last one, 13 or 14, I can't remember which number I'm up to, but this is the last one. Not everything's going to be automated. And sometimes there's going to be workarounds in terms of the automation. And sometimes that's okay, because to be honest, having some human oversight, in particular around reporting, can be extremely helpful. So if there's a need to sort of have a person in between two component pieces, sometimes that's not a bad thing at all. So that was my speed bump. So what are the key takeaways here? So number one, map the sources of truth and define sort of the main part of the aggregation point. So where is a lot of that going to be held, and is it going to be able to become in? Is it going to be able to come in automatically, manually, and where is it going to come in terms of your external suppliers? The other one, keep an eye on total costs, not necessarily just a sticker price. Start simple with time series, like I said, then earn complexity to a certain degree. I think that's a really good way of doing it. If you've got a really simple office that's just looking for simple outputs, don't think that you're always going to be there. But if you can create software or curate the infrastructure there that is really, really accurate and accessible data, and you could, if you wanted to become more complex or more sophisticated in your platform output, move it really easily to it, then that's an amazing thing to be. As opposed to, oh, look, we've got it on spreadsheets, we're not really sure where it all is. You know, that backfill when you're going to more sophisticated platforms can be quite expensive and time consuming. So that's it. That's what I'm saying. So hopefully that was of help. If you're interested in understanding how I work with clients to avoid or fix these, challenges or speed bumps or whatever, and help clients sort of navigate the operational and technology infrastructure as it comes in the sort of the investment committee in particular, because that's where a lot of the time we use these reporting structures, then please feel free to email me, Shaun, so SHAUN at wholroad, HALLROAD.com.au. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to, if you ping me on that, I'll nearly always reply. If you're enjoying the podcast, please ding the little alert bell, or you'll get an alert next time it comes out in the notification. If you want to visit the Sherpa website, which is where the podcast, newsletter, guides, and videos are, just head on over to www.thefamilyofficesherpa.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.